The existence of evil presents one of the most enduring and profound challenges to belief in the all-good, all-powerful, and all-knowing God. For many, the sheer scale of suffering, injustice, and moral depravity in the world seems irreconcilable with the benevolent nature attributed to the divine Creator. In this video, I will argue that a deeper philosophical and theological understanding of evil, particularly its classical definition as privation, illuminates the logical coherence of theistic belief. Furthermore, I will contend that the very act of identifying something as evil implicitly posits a universal moral law, which in turn necessitates a moral lawgiver. Finally, I will address the common lament, why doesn't God do anything? By highlighting the profound and personal intervention of God in human suffering through the person of Jesus Christ. The classical understanding of evil, articulated by thinkers from Plato and Plotinus to Augustine and Aquinas, posits that evil has no ontological essence. Ontology is the branch of metaphysics that has to do with the idea of beginnings. It is not a thing in itself, nor is it a substance. Instead, evil is understood as a privation or negation of good. To say that evil is a privation means it is the absence, corruption, or perversion of something that should be present or whole. It is a defect in a good thing, rather than a positive entity. Consider the analogy of a hole in a piece of cloth. The hole itself is not a substance. It is the absence of cloth where cloth ought to be. One cannot have a hole without the cloth. Similarly, sickness is not a positive entity, but the absence or malfunctioning of health. Blindness is the privation of sight. In the moral realm, this concept holds true. When a man, driven by the biblical mandate to provide for his family, works diligently, this act is inherently good. It aligns with his nature and purpose. However, when his desire to provide perverts into an insatiable lust for money, leading him to exploit others or neglect his family, this is evil. The evil is not the money itself, nor the desire to provide, but the perversion of that good desire, the absence of proper moderation, justice, and love. This understanding is crucial, because it avoids several theological pitfalls. If evil were an independent substance, or a co-equal force to good, it would imply a dualistic universe, where God is either not omnipotent, unable to overcome evil, or not all good, having created evil as a positive entity. By defining evil as a privation, it becomes clear that God, who is the source of all being and goodness, does not create evil. Rather, evil arises from the misuse of created goods, the turning away from the good, or the corruption of what was initially good. It is a parasitic reality, dependent on the good for its very existence, just as a shadow depends on light. The very act of raising the problem of evil presupposes a fundamental, often unstated, premise that evil is objectively real and morally reprehensible. When we look at acts of genocide, torture, or profound injustice, we intuitively recoil, declaring them evil. But what is the basis for such a judgment? If morality is merely subjective preference, a matter of cultural convention, or an evolutionary byproduct, then the concept of evil loses its objective force. It becomes nothing more than a personal dislike or a socially constructed disapproval. However, the common human experience, and indeed the very framing of the problem of evil, suggests a deeper conviction that there exists an objective moral standard, a moral law, against which actions and character can be judged as good or evil. This moral law is not something we invent. Rather, it is something we discover or recognize. It is the basis upon which we can universally condemn atrocities, regardless of cultural background. If such an objective moral law exists, then it logically necessitates a moral lawgiver. Laws do not simply emerge from nothing. They are enacted by an authority. Just as physical laws describe the order of the universe, a moral law implies an ultimate moral authority who established the standard of good. To claim that evil exists, and to make a genuine moral judgment against it, while simultaneously denying the existence of a moral lawgiver, leads to a profound logical incoherence. One cannot consistently affirm the objective reality of evil without implicitly affirming the objective source of the moral standard by which evil is defined. The argument, if God is all good and all holy and all loving and wise, why is there evil? Implicitly assumes the existence of a moral standard by which God's actions, or perceived inaction, are being judged. This very assumption, therefore, points to the existence of a moral law. And if there is a moral law, there must be a moral lawgiver. Without this divine foundation, the question itself loses its grounding. It becomes a complaint against a non-existent standard, or a purely subjective lament without universal validity. The problem of evil, rather than disproving God, can thus be seen as an argument for the existence of the moral lawgiver, whose nature is the very definition of good. Another common facet of the problem of evil is the anguished cry, "Why doesn't God do anything?" This question often stems from a perception of divine detachment, as if God observes human suffering from a distance without involvement. However, from a Christian theological perspective, this premise is fundamentally mistaken. The central claim of Christianity is that God has not remained aloof, but has decisively and intimately entered into human suffering and the reality of evil. This intervention is most profoundly demonstrated in the person of Jesus Christ. The Incarnation, God becoming human, is the ultimate act of divine solidarity with humanity in its fallen state. Jesus, as fully God and fully man, the hypostatic union, experienced the full spectrum of human pain and suffering. He knew rejection from his own people, faced injustice at the hands of religious and political authorities, endured betrayal from his closest friends, and ultimately suffered a horrific, sacrificial death on the cross. Through Christ, God personally experienced the very evils that humans lament. Jesus was rejected by the religious leaders, his hometown, and ultimately, by many he came to save. He was falsely accused, subjected to an unfair trial, and condemned despite his innocence. His crucifixion was a brutal, agonizing form of execution, designed to inflict maximum physical and psychological torment. One of his disciples betrayed him, and another denied him. He experienced the pain of losing loved ones, such as John the Baptist and Lazarus. This personal experience of suffering is not merely an act of empathy, it is a profound theological statement. It means that when we cry out in pain, God is not ignorant of our experience. He has been there. He knows about rejection, injustice, and pain not merely intellectually, but experientially. His suffering on the cross is understood as a vicarious atonement, a bearing of the world's sin and evil, and a redemptive act that offers the only hope, forgiveness, and ultimately, victory over death and evil itself. Therefore, the question, "Why doesn't God do anything?" is answered by pointing to the cross. God has done something, and it is the most radical and costly act imaginable. He entered into the heart of human suffering, bore its weight, and provided the only means for its ultimate defeat and for reconciliation with himself. This act does not eliminate all suffering in the present, but it provides meaning, hope, and a path to redemption within it, while promising a future where evil will be definitively eliminated. The problem of evil, while emotionally potent and intellectually challenging, finds coherent answers only within this robust Christian theological framework. By understanding evil not as an independent entity but as a privation of good, we avoid attributing its creation to the all-good God and recognize its parasitic nature. Furthermore, the very language we use to articulate the problem of evil, the judgment that something is evil, presupposes an objective moral law, which in turn demands a moral lawgiver. This inherent logical connection shows that the existence of evil, paradoxically, points towards the existence of the transcendent moral authority. Finally, the assertion that God has done nothing in the face of evil is profoundly contradicted by the Christian narrative of the Incarnation and Crucifixion. In Jesus Christ, God personally entered into the depths of human suffering, experiencing rejection, injustice, and pain, and offering the only sacrificial solution to the problem of sin and its consequences. This divine solidarity and redemptive act demonstrate not only God's profound love and empathy, but also his active engagement with the reality of evil. Rather than being a sign of intellectual contempt, a careful consideration of these theological and philosophical perspectives reveals a coherent and compassionate response to one of humanity's most persistent questions.